I certainly think the NFL is better when the Cowboys are relevant and at least competent to good. Might not like it. We don't have to like it. Certainly don't. Because no matter what, the NFL is going to force them down your fucking throats. And if they're actually good or really good, they're going to go out of their way to do so even more. Well, Jeff, they draw on the fans. Yeah, because you have pathetically pounded them down everybody's fucking throats for decades. And anytime you might have a potential usurper or somebody else that you could use to strengthen your bench strength, if you will, they undercut them. It's like the old WWE John Cena booking philosophy. If somebody like a CM Punk or somebody else comes along that could potentially threaten the mantle, you're going to hurry up and undercut that at every chance you possibly can. That's what it is, right? But there is no doubting that the NFL is better when the Cowboys matter. And they have mattered in recent years, not mattered enough, right, to be bothered to make an NFC championship game, but mattered enough. And I thought this was going to be an interesting team heading into 2024 because they were coming off of 3 straight 12-win seasons under head coach Mike McCarthy and also coming off of 3 straight early playoff exits and only 1 playoff win during that time. And now you're coming into 2024 where Mike McCarthy is going to be a lame duck head coach and basically coaching for his future contract. Meanwhile, you just broke the bank for Dak Prescott, who, if you're not going to sit there and give McCarthy an extension for the early playoff exits, why the fuck are you breaking the bank for Dak Prescott when he's been a big part of those early playoff exits? It's just fascinating to me. But, this is a team on the surface, you're like, all right, the Cowboys, like, all joking aside, all hating aside, they've got some pretty good talent on both sides of the ball. They got some marquee players. Like, this is a team that can do some damage. Well, they didn't do much damage this year. The wheels didn't totally fall off, but wasn't exactly a great story. Got off to kind of a roughish start, but still were 3-3 at the bye week after getting boat raced by the Lions in week 6. But what happened was they lost 4 in a row coming off of the bye, and their season was effectively over at this point. They lost Dak Prescott due to injury for the year after the Atlanta game. So you're talking about a guy that you've given $60 million plus a damn year to, and then he's going to miss almost half the season. Not great. There's no more Tyron Smith. He was gone to the Jets where he looked kind of washed up. You had 10 games from Zach Martin, who didn't, to me, quite look like he had in years past. That O-line certainly took a step back in 2024, something that had been a strength at varying levels for this team for a number of years. Rico Dowdle eclipsed 1,000 yards rushing on the ground, but only 2 rushing touchdowns, and like a solid performer, but not of like franchise back. And the Cowboys overall were 27th in the league in rushing yards per game. CeeDee Lamb was pretty good. Jalen Tolbert was okay. The rest of the receiving group was kind of And then you look at their defense, they certainly had some issues, right? Micah Parsons missed a few games. Trayvon Diggs only played 11 games. Deron Bland only played 7 games. DeMarcus Lawrence played 4 games. So at varying levels, some of these key cogs on your defense, some of your real star impact players were out for some amount or sizable, significant amounts of time. And when you pair that with you're without your quarterback for almost half a year, like that's a really big damn deal. Whereas you look at like the 49ers, you want to blame injuries. They still had their quarterback and a lot of their stars for most of the season. I think the Cowboys and some of the injuries they had were a little more impactful overall than what the 49ers had. The defense lost Dan Quinn as their defensive coordinator, and that certainly showed in the defense's performance in 2024. They were 31st in points allowed, 28th in total yards allowed. So yeah, kind of a rough year on that defense. And then when you think about like what's the next wave of the Cowboys look like? How do the future stars look? Well, if you're basing it off of the performances of recent first round picks, Tyler Guyton and Maisie Smith, not great because they both stunk to high hell. To high fucking hell. And for Guyton, you're talking about playing offensive tackle, rookie, okay, maybe. But Maisie Smith's in year 2. Just no impact, no presence, nothing to the table at all. He lacks the ability to get after the quarterback, which is only surpassed by his inability as a big fat ass to play the run. Not good. So this is a team in the Cowboys that actually, historically, invest in the trenches early in the draft. And for a team that has invested wisely and effectively in the trenches in the past decade or so, in the draft on the trenches on both sides of the ball. Not so much recently. That's all I'm saying. And with all of this in play, obviously it was a disappointing season for the Cowboys. Didn't go nearly to plan. The answer apparently is to not bring Mike McCarthy back on a new contract. And look, like Mike McCarthy is not spectacular by any stretch of the imagination, but this is a guy that you just won 12 games under 3 straight seasons. And again, I come back to the whole dynamic of, well, if you blame Mike McCarthy for the early playoff losses, which I do, I thought he should have been fired after 2023 or maybe even before that, right? But at least after 2023. But you bring him back, but then the other guy that has a lot of responsibility there is Dak Prescott, and you're rewarding him with a contract extension. Like, this shit doesn't make any fucking sense. But, again, you waited a year too late to move on from Mike McCarthy, but you're going to do it now. So then your answer is to promote Brian Schottenheimer to be the next head coach? It's his third stint as an NFL offensive coordinator, yet he's really never had anybody beating down the door, strongly considering him for their head job. Like, you would think if you were going after a former Cowboys offensive coordinator, Kellen Moore would have made more sense here. Like, this feels like such a, you overplayed your hand and you had to settle type of thing. Like, really, really interesting and questionable to me. And it doesn't get a whole lot better for the Cowboys because Zach Martin just retired. And the only question about him now is not if he'll be in the Hall of Fame, but whether he'll be a first ballot guy in the class of 2030. We'll see. But he certainly belongs, and there's a strong argument to make that Zach Martin is a top 5 guard in NFL history, which is really wild when you go back to 2014 in that year's draft. And when the Cowboys picked him, was that at pick 16? And how heavily that pick was criticized and booed because it wasn't Johnny Manziel. That's something else, man. You've got some potential drama developing regarding Micah Parsons and his long-term place with the team, his long-term contract, all that other stuff. It's just wild. It doesn't seem like there always has to be some drama with the diva-ass Dallas Cowboys. That's a direct reflection of your ownership and Jerry Jones. And unfortunately for Cowboys fans, it ain't the early to mid-90s anymore. Jimmy Johnson's not there to build the foundation of the team. And you're stuck with Jerry until he's gone. And they've got some other free agents, you know, along with Zach Martin retiring, DeMarcus Lawrence, Brandon Cooks, Eric Kendricks. So a team with some real needs, no cap space, that has committed a shit ton of money to a non-elite quarterback and seem to settle on their head coaching hire. Ugh. Forgive me if I don't sound too effusive in my praise of the Dallas Cowboys organization right now. So as we look to this offseason, what do they need? Well, number one is a new owner, but we know that's not going to happen. But it is always worth mentioning. And I can't imagine at this point, even for most hardened, die-in-the-wool Cowboys fans, why you would possibly defend Jerry Jones. In fact, you would think if anybody should have reason to criticize Jerry Jones above anybody else, it's them. You've seen how this shit's played out over the past 3 decades. It's wild to me. But need for a new owner aside, what about the roster? Well, I think it starts on the offense and at the skill positions. Like you got CeeDee Lamb. He's a beast. He's a lot of fun to watch. But outside of that in the passing game, like Jalen Tolbert's okay, but he's not like high-end number 2 type of guy. You need a dynamic playmaker with some speed on the other side or in the slot that can open up things for CeeDee Lamb in the passing game. And then they need a difference-making running back, which is why I'm certain you'll see a lot of projections in mock drafts of them taking Ashton Genty at number 12 or taking somebody like an Omarion Hampton or a Travion Henderson, a Quinshon Judkins, somebody, Caleb Johnson in the second round because the Cowboys need more at the running back position. And obviously with Zach Martin's retiring, left guard just became a massive need. So you're going to have to invest in the offensive line at some point in time. And then I think in the defense, you know, there's an argument that you can make at different points in time in this draft that they're going to need to invest in the trenches and in the linebacking core. They need help on their front 7. Now, the good thing for the Cowboys is their needs, you know, they're pretty similar in terms of level and importance. So they can kind of approach this year's draft with a little bit more of less focus on the need and more focus on the highest ceiling, best available talent. And that's a good approach to have. But they do need to come out of this draft with some real difference makers. Because the past couple of years in the first round, Tyler Guyton, like I said, I know he's just coming off his rookie year, but it wasn't great, right? And then Maisie Smith just flat out sucks. I don't know what else to tell you. So you better do a better job in this year's draft. Otherwise, the Cowboys in a division with the Eagles, who coming back and they'll still be pretty loaded, in the Commanders, who are a bit on the ascendancy. Like, it could be troubled times for Dallas. Just saying.